Hey everyone, my name is Matt. Today I'm going to try and walk us through some of the more advanced features within Auth0. As you can see here on the left-hand side under Applications, I've come to the API section. We'll cover a few others. We're not going to dive into everything. I'm going to do that kind of live with the class at another point. But I do want to get this across because it's really applicable to everything that we do. There's a lot of crossover into cloud computing in this class in general. So what I've done is I've created a Datastore API right here. So we can walk through that process by just creating a test API. So we'll just call this, and it might need to be, we'll just call this test API. And basically here we're just giving it an identifier. So you can just HTTPS. It doesn't have to, this isn't actually calling out to your API. So there's nothing you really need to worry about here. So if you want to just call it test API like that, this is just a value that we're going to assign as an audience parameter. Um, when we authenticate into Auth0, and I'll show that on the application side in a little while. Signing algorithm, just whichever one you want to use. I usually stick with RS-256. So when we create that, there's a lot of really good documentation here, depending on what language you're using. I think most of us are probably going to be using Node.js, so that's what I went with. Here, it's going to take you through a walkthrough. Your API will be parsing the JOT and formatting the access tokens. So we're going to be using these access tokens to make requests via Postman or via from your application. Today I'll be using Postman, but really helpful tool that we are going to utilize today is this jot.io. So basically we can plug our access or ID token, any form of JOT into here, and it will spit out the information from that JOT. When we go to configure this, so a couple of things to point out. So this Express OAuth2 JOT bearer is the NPM module that we're going to be using. You can just type that into Google and get a lot more information about the package itself. So we'll use this auth, and then we're going to use a different one called required scopes, and we'll get to that later on. But basically that takes in an audience, an issuer-based URL, which is basically just your tenant. You can see here. And the signing algorithm that you're using. Now, this is saying if we put this on our API, this is JOT check, this will enforce all endpoints within our our API. But we might want some that are actually public, so we're not going to do that, and we'll jump into that later. Enough of this for now. We'll kind of move along. Here under the settings, a couple of things that we're going to want to tinker with here is we're going to want to enable RBAC and add permissions onto the access token. This will allow us when someone calls our API, we can make sure that user has the appropriate permissions. So it's the next level. So there's a public access, right? Anyone can access it. There's private, which might be that user's authenticated, and we can verify the JOT signature. And basically just say, hey, that user's authenticated, let's let them make this request. And then that third level is going to be using RBAC or role-based access control. Basically, we're going to assign permissions here, and then our users that have those permissions are going to be able to access those endpoints. So even if someone's authenticated and they try and hit your endpoint, if you have kind of like a scope check or a requirement there, then it won't let them make that request, even if they are authenticated. So here is where we're going to go and define our permissions, and they've laid out some nicely here. So in our case, maybe you want something like read votes, ability to read votes. We can add that, and maybe we want write votes, writing votes. And then maybe something like manage all. Ability to do anything in Datastore or with our API. Now you can bucket these permissions under a role. We'll get to that in a minute as well. We'll probably just be using the permissions themselves today, but just something that you can do. Now, when you create one of these APIs, what it's actually done is it's spun up a machine-to-machine application on the back end. So that's where our test application is. It gives us a client ID, some other information that we'll want to utilize later. So these other machine-to-machine applications can use this API if we toggle these guys on. The actions management API client we'll get to later on as well. But that's basically the ability to interface and do anything within this platform. We call that the management API. So it basically allows you to manage it programmatically. Every single thing within this dashboard, every button that you can click on is configurable through the management API. You can put your whole front end. If you don't like this dashboard, you can create your own, and everything you can configure. There are lower rate limits, obviously, than like authentication endpoints when we talk about management API, but that's kind of esoteric. We don't need to really go there. So I'm going to utilize this data store one because that's what I have set up today. My permissions under that one are just manage all, manage data store. I probably should have made it what I just made it earlier, like read boats, write boats, etc. So this is what we're going to use. Let's go ahead and show what this looks like from the application side. So on here, I'm within basically just one of the starter applications within Auth0. So if I came to my applications, what I did is I created an application, and this is a regular web app. Whatever language you're using, you can choose. If you're doing a single page application or a mobile one, you can just go ahead and create that here. Choose your language. So I'm using Express, wherever that is. So Node.js Express. So this is where you would click and it would take you to, do you want to integrate with your own app or explore sample? Just do the sample. If you explore this sample app, you can actually save and download the app, and it will come preceded with all the environment variables that are configured to your tenant. You can just up and run it. Really simple. By no means am I an expert in Node.js. I just tinker with things, and they actually make it easy with the startup guides. So I just have my, where is it? My OSU 493 boats. That's my starter application. I'll go ahead and pull this guy back onto the screen. So the only really configuration changes that we'll make from the starter application is we'll come here under the config, and we're going to add some things. Client secret. So that should be dropped into your environment file when you started up the application. I might have relabeled things, so just go check in there, and basically we just precede it like this. You just need a client ID, an issuer base URL. And then this is the other piece that I need to add. Okay, this is the authorization parameters. This tells you what scope we're going to request from that end user. And the audience is that API we created. That's the Datastore API. If I come back here to my APIs, click on Datastore API, we can see that identifier right there. Let me jump back into here. How did I find this? Well, I basically just copied this guy, pasted it, found the first link. Let's see. I think I was playing around with some examples, but I actually just wanted the NPM module itself. Here it is. So in here, I was kind of scrolling through, and you can see this gets close. This is telling us this is what we need, but this is where I was really able to figure it out. Config parameters. Okay, so these are all the things that we can pass into our config element here. And as I was scrolling through this, this is where I was like, okay, this tells you, okay, the scopes. So there's just a space delimited between them. So an open ID, profile, email, and then this is where you would drop any of your kind of custom claims that you created. So we said read, write boats. You just put a space between them, or manage all. If that user logs in and they have that permission, then they will have that on their access token under the permissions. You put your identifier under it. So back into here, let's see if yeah, so that's basically the starter application. That's really the only thing I changed. In the profile, I added this access token variable, which essentially just comes from request.oidc access token and an access token. I'm just passing that over so that I can view it on the page. The ID token is there as well. The access token is what we're going to be using to make the request. Perfect. Let me try and find my... This is the problem with having too many tabs open. It should be this guy. Okay. So let's go ahead and log out here. We'll log back in. And I'll just use my regular email and log back in. So it's saying it wants to access the profile and email and it wants to manage your data store. Okay, I'll say accept. We can view this. Now, here's the access token, and this is the ID token. So I'll go ahead and grab that access token, and then we'll go back to that jot.io, and we'll plug it into there, and it will tell us what permissions we have. So this user, I've assigned the permissions of manage all and data store. I believe I did that under a role. Let's actually log out, and let's just sign up a testing.test. Okay, so it's saying it wants to access your profile and email. I don't have the permissions for that data store piece, which we'll see in a second. So we'll go ahead and grab this access token. And in here, we see an empty array of permissions. So I'm authenticated. I can make requests to that authenticated endpoint. I can't make requests to anything further than that if there is requirements. Now let's take a look. Let's actually take this access token that we just came in. We don't have any permissions. And let's take a look at the API here. And let's just do our create boats endpoint. Well, let me take a step back actually. Let's go to server. This is where we're going to be able to assign that audience. Okay, so that's the Datastore API. This is coming from the same package. So we have the auth and we have the required scopes. So this is my API right here. You just plug in an issuer base URL and the audience here. This required scopes piece is where we can grab anything else that we want if we want to put this on a different endpoint. So I could put that check scopes on an endpoint, and if they don't have this permission, they won't be able to access it. Okay, so I have a jot check, which just simply checks if they're authenticated, and I have a check scopes, which simply checks if they have that permission. We'll go over to boats. Now, the only difference here, so we see like I have my get boats endpoint, that's public, anyone can hit that. And we have a jot check. So let me actually go ahead and remove that guy. And where are we listening? 8080. Actually, I just want to go to Postman. So we can go and add a boat. Let's see here. Oh, I did configure the owner to be set up with this. Well, let's go ahead and use this. Yeah, it's because I have the, I actually need that jot in there because I'm using that as the owner of the boat. So if we wanted to make it public and we weren't actually grabbing a piece of like the user's sub value, because let's find it in here. I'm using this request auth payload sub, so that grabs the sub value when you use a jot check on an endpoint. Because I'm not using that, it's erroring out. Let's just go ahead and put jot check into here. Hopefully that's not called check jot. Let's go to that jot.io. Let's grab this access token and we'll switch that out. And we'll go ahead and post. Let me restart the API here. Drop that into there. Let's go ahead and send that guy. Still doesn't want to work. Big dummy. I put it on the wrong endpoint here. Okay. So now we have that on our post boats. Let me restart this guy. I'll go ahead and post this. Okay. So we've just created a boat and we had to be authenticated in order to do that. Now, if I wasn't authenticated, I'd get a 401 unauthorized. Now let's go back to this guy. And I believe I called this check scopes. So let's try check scopes on here now. And we'll run this. We'll go back here. Remember, this is checking the scopes now for that manage data store in order to be able to do this. I don't have that. So let's hit this. So it says insufficient scope error. We get a 403 forbidden, not able to access that endpoint. Now, I want to pivot to how we can get a user this permission. So there's a couple of different ways we can do this. So we spoke earlier about roles, which we'll touch on in a second. So this is that testing.test@atco.email. So there's one way we can do it. We can assign it via the dashboard. I can come in here and assign permissions. I select my Datastore API, and maybe they need that managed data store. I could do that, and then they would have the sufficient scopes. The other way I could do it is if I wanted to create a role. So we'll just call this data store role. Call that admin. And what I was talking about before is that roles are a collection of permissions. So we can come in here and we can actually add as many permissions as we want. So in that earlier case, if we wanted to say, okay, I want to read, write, and manage all, maybe manage all has something other than these two, they can add that permission to that role. And I can assign it to a user here, or I can go back and I can assign that role here. Okay. Now, I'm not going to do that on that user. When we think about, especially in our use case, one of the TAs is going to come in and they're going to log in. We don't know when they're going to log in. We're not going to be able to assign them that role in time. So we kind of know who we want to have those elevated privileges ahead of time. So we could make some assumptions. So typically, if you had a B2B use case, a business-to-business use case, where you know that business's IT administrators or their developers, you want to give someone access to then give them the ability to then add access to other people. There's a huge extensibility tool within Auth0. If I come into here, and it's called Actions. Now, Actions is basically like cloud-hosted Lambda functions that sit in the authentication pipeline. So we have things that we could do like a post login action, pre-user registration, post-user registration. This is an incredibly powerful tool. In these, we can basically write custom JavaScript to do whatever we want. If we want to reach out to another system, maybe we indexed our users somewhere else and we reach out to that system and say, hey, if this user with this email signs in, should they have elevated permissions? So we can add things, so we can add custom claims to their ID or their access token. We could also check like, hey, if they're not coming in from an Oregon State email, maybe we just block authentication. We just deny them access to our application. The extensibility is pretty much unlimited in here. You can just code. So if I come to my login action, I've actually set up a couple. So one of them is adding custom claims to an access token, and the other one's adding roles to authorized users. Now, I didn't do role, I did permission. That name's a little misleading, but we'll come down here and we can see what I'm getting at. So this is a post login action, so I really only need to assign them a role or permission once and they're good to go. So what I'm checking here is if this is their first login. So if it is, we'll proceed. If not, let's just return. We're going to end right there. Okay, so if that user's email includes Oregon, does not include Oregon, then we're going to end there. And if it does, then we'll go through the rest of this process. So maybe we only want Oregon State users, or we say if it ends in at oregonstate.edu, then we want to make them some special permission or role. The Auth0 management client, like I said before, is anything within this management dashboard we can do programmatically. So we can actually use actions to talk to our own management API as well. So the config or the setup of this is basically we create a new management client, we give it our domain, our client ID, and our client secret. Where this event.secrets.client secret is coming from is my secrets here. So it's very developer friendly, so I can stash all my secrets over here. Basically, give it a key and a value, and just set it, and it's good to go. We can also bring in, I think it's up to 10 NPM modules within each one of these. So if you wanted to make requests to another database or system that you stood up, you can add those dependencies into here. So I just needed the Auth0 one to make requests to my management client. But you could bring in Axios or pretty much anything that you want. We'll show a data store one a little bit as well. The rest of this piece is, I did the same thing. I looked up the Auth0 management client and I was looking at basically how to add permissions to a user. So this is the first time they're logging in. If it's not, we don't proceed. And I'm just going to go, okay, permissions and the permission name, which is managed data store, and the resource server identifier, which we had earlier, which is our data store API. Okay, so we're just going to assign that managed data store to them if they have Oregon in their email. This is the command to do it. We're just going to assign that permission. We're going to pass it the params, just that user's ID and the data. One thing I didn't talk to is that at the top of each one of these functions, there's an event object and an API object. A lot of different things you can do. The event basically has all the details about the login event. So a lot of popular ones are using user. There is data that you can store on a user within Auth0 as well. So if you wanted to add something to their app metadata, like a subscription, permission, or a role, and we just wanted to check, like, hey, if that user has something within that app metadata, then let's give them this permission to or let's set a custom claim on their ID or their access token. Then that is available there. API object, primarily used for things like redirecting people or access. So if maybe we want to deny their access if they're coming in with a certain email, or maybe we reach out to an external source of information that we're storing somewhere and we have a list of blocked users, and we could just reach out to that, say, hey, if they're in that blocked user list, then let's deny them access. Perfect. So let's go ahead and fire up a login with an Oregon email, and we'll do this in sign up. And let's just say Matt at OregonState.edu. So we see that it's telling me I can manage the data store. And I will go ahead and plug that into jot.io. And under these permissions, I have the managed data store. So we can actually come back here to Postman, drop that information in there. We can send that. I'm authorized to do it. I'm the owner. I had the right permission. If you remember earlier, we then put that check scopes into there. So yeah, I mean, that's the premise of working with APIs, and Auth0 really streamlines a lot of that for you. It does a lot of things inside the SDK behind the scenes. It just abstracts it away from you so that you're not dealing with it yourself. We'll talk a little bit more about actions, but that's pretty much the bulk of what I wanted to cover today. Let's go to, sorry, bear with me for a second. Oh, here's that management client. So I was looking in here at some of the things you could do, and I think I just did, yep, assign permission to user, and it's very documented and well detailed. So there was the piece that I needed for that. Okay. Another really cool thing, like I said, it's very developer friendly. So there's a full version history in here. So if I wanted to actually, like, something's not working and I need to roll back to a different version, I can just revert at any time. So we'll go ahead and look at our login flow again. This is where I did some, oh, clicked on the exact same one I'm on. This is where I just, it's another one that says, hey, if the email includes Oregon and the email includes OSU, basically we'll add a data store role as user. So if you wanted to use that instead, if you didn't want to go the whole permission route, you can actually just assign these kind of custom on the fly and not have to go through this whole piece of even setting up the permissions under an API. And then if your name's Naman, you get a data store role of elite raid boss. Maybe that is the ability to do anything like destroy the database. One last one I did under post user registration. So if I come here, drop that create user in there, we can apply that. Basically, I call out to my data store. I set up a service account within data store. I put some of these secrets in the secrets bucket here. You can see this one's not because it's extremely long, so I'd probably have to parse that out and didn't feel like doing that. But I'm just checking, hey, if that user it doesn't already exist or the email doesn't already exist within my data store, then let's go ahead and create a user. And we can use that user's ID as the key, as that ID value. And then maybe we just want to say, hey, the email of that user, the created at, and then we'll leave gender null for now, but you might have another endpoint on your API that lets you the user update their gender. Huge other piece of extensibility here is we can actually test these things. So let me find email. Let's just make this like, we'll just make it Matt. So if I run this, it tells us, what happened, that execution went through. I didn't log anything to the console, but it would tell you there. This does run it, so it would pop up in your data store. So if I went to users, yep, we have that matt@example.com there, and there's the name or ID associated with it, which is my Auth0 ID. In terms of creating that service account, if this is something that you're actually looking to do, you can come up to the IAM service accounts, create service account, and then it will spit something like this out. And then here you could do add key. You could create a new key and get that JSON. I just extracted the information out of that JSON, put it right into my action. Yeah, that's APIs and actions. Actions are incredibly powerful. I can go on about it for a long time, but I'll save you guys that. See if there's anything else I'm missing here. No, I think that that does a good job covering APIs. It is more of like an advanced topic. So when I actually go and demo to customers, it's usually high level. I'm taking them through the dashboard, some of the features. If they have a strong RBAC requirement, it's something that we definitely touch on. We have specialists that cover kind of the deep in the weeds scenarios. And a lot of the times you'll see customers come, they already have the full RBAC system built out, and they're not really looking at Auth0 to handle that. It's just another feature within Auth0 that comes out of the box that you can choose to use or not. So complete preference and kind of what you're looking to do. Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Take care.